Hi folks, welcome to our online interview about discipleship in a digital age, brought to you by the Uniting Church in Australia, Port Phillip East Presbytery. I'm Craig Mitchell, here in Melbourne, Australia, and with me online is Dr. Bex Lewis, who is currently in Auckland, New Zealand. So say hi, Bex.
Hello.
We have audio.
And I'm Duncan Macleod. Yeah.
And my colleague Duncan. So let me introduce Bex and tell you what we're doing here today. Bex, oh, hi Duncan, you're on the big screen. Bex is a senior lecturer in digital marketing at Manchester Metropolitan University in England, and she's been teaching and studying in the field of communication for over a couple of decades, actually. She's the author of a best-selling book, Raising Children in a Digital Age, which I've left at home, but Bex has got a copy right there. Her PhD focused on the history of communication, particularly in the 20th century. And if you've seen that war poster, Keep Calm and Carry On, Bex wrote her PhD about that poster. She wrote it in very small writing on the back, but no, it was about the poster, not on the poster. But most importantly for us, she's done a whole lot of work with churches and Christian organisations, again over a couple of decades, to help them understand and learn to live in the digital world. So she's one of the pioneers in that area. And we're delighted to have you here today, Bex, for this. This is a new thing for us as well. So for those viewing at home, I'm working the front end and Duncan's working the back end, and he'll be handling your questions. Bex, before we start...
Craig.
Duncan, is it
Facebook
working?
Live has just dropped out. We're going to
Facebook Live has just dropped out.
We're just going to have to start again.
That's a good start.
Hi folks, we're back. We started and we stopped, and that's life in a digital world, really. So I'm Craig Mitchell, Port Phillip East Presbytery at the Uniting Church in Australia in Melbourne, speaking with Dr. Bex Lewis from Manchester Metropolitan University, who happens to be in Auckland. And I was about to say, Bex, why is it that you're in New Zealand right now and not in Manchester or Melbourne, in fact?
Yes, so I won a 2-month writing scholarship at Vaughan Park, which is about 20-30 minutes out of Auckland, to write a second edition of this book, which you may or may not have seen in the first bit of waving, Raising Children in the Digital Age, which I wrote in 2014. And so the idea was it was written on principles which are still, I reread it and I think, I still agree with most of what I've written. But, there's reference to things like MySpace and Bebo in there, which just make it look really outdated. And I think over the last few years, there's become a lot more concern with screen time and privacy and safety. So the idea is to produce a second edition.
Yes, again.
We've done it.
We're live now. Folks, this is attempt number 3 to start our online digital workshop, and I hope you can see me because I'm getting well rehearsed at this presentation, okay? Churches around the country have been trying to work out how to be church online, and now as a presbytery, we're trying to work out how to be presbytery online. So I'm Craig Mitchell from Port Phillip East Presbytery in the Uniting Church, and talking to Dr. Bex Lewis, who I'm going to introduce for the 3rd time. Bex? I should just let you do it, shouldn't I? So talking to Bex, who's in New Zealand. So here we go again. Bex is senior lecturer in digital marketing at Manchester Metropolitan University in England, and she's been teaching and studying in the field of communication for a couple of decades. She's the author of a best-selling book called Raising Children in a Digital Age, and I left mine at home, but Bex has got hers right here. And she did a PhD on the history of communication, particularly in the 20th century. But most importantly, Bex has worked with churches and Christian organisations over a couple of decades, helping them think about how to be church in a digital world. Now, Bex was going to be flying. So Bex, I'm going to cut to the chase a bit here, Bex. Bex has been in New Zealand working on kind of on sabbatical, working on an update to that book, but she chose a really bad time to travel. Didn't you, Bex? Say hello. Say hello and tell us about your travel plans, just briefly, before we get into it.
Yeah, so I flew into Auckland on 1st of March, planning to be at Vaughan Park for a writing scholarship for 2 months to write a second edition of Raising Children in a Digital Age, which I first wrote in 2014. It's written on principles, so there's still a lot that's relevant, but obviously it looks very outdated, and there's some things that people have become more concerned about, such as screen time and privacy. So trying to update those bits. But yeah, I think the first 2 weeks of this scholarship went to plan, and then coronavirus kind of took over like it has everyone else. So concentration's been poor, and I have secured a charter flight to go back to the UK on Saturday instead of flying to Australia, which I was supposed to be doing on Friday.
That's right. Instead of coming here, you're going home, and that's a good thing for you and not good for us, but we're delighted that we can do this. So, folks, the way we're going to do this today is we've got 5 areas that Bex is going to talk about. Duncan will be managing comments and questions, so if you'd like to ask questions, then do that, and we'll pause at the end of each section to answer some of those questions that Duncan's going to select from the feed. We plan to take a kind of a half-time break just for 5 minutes because we're all going to need a coffee or whatever, and we'll finish when we're finished. Does that sound all right? It's weird when you can't see people, isn't it? We can just see ourselves. Anyway. And no, we're not attempting communion. I just thought I'd throw that in. So, Bex, a friend said to me the other day, in reference to the lockdown and what it means for churches, he said, "You've been preparing for times like this your whole life." And I kind of had to nod and agree because, you know, like I love multimedia, I love communication technology, I love thinking about it, and I love helping churches with it. But in terms of churches, so we're in this COVID world and people suddenly go, oh, there's all this technology around and, you know, the world has changed. Well, I guess my first question is, has the world changed?
The world always changes. You know, as we said, I started off as a historian looking at 20th century communication. Keep calm and carry on. If you want to know anything about it, that's my other book. So in some ways it's thinking about, is this really a moment of revolution? I've done talks in the past about, are we in a digital revolution, or actually is what happening? Is it very much change that has always happened? You know, history, there's always continuity and there's always change. And communication is always about, you know, connection between two people. So there's a kind of chance here to think about things that are different. But yeah, I first started working particularly with churches, and I did an accessibility and usability project back in 2001, 2002. So trying to get people involved and included and using technology for that. But churches specifically, the last 11, 12 years, been looking at how we can use it. And it's been quite interesting watching people say, oh, there's this completely new thing that we're all doing now. It's like, actually, people have been experimenting with this in various ways for years, but there's been a lot of resistance within the church. So it's seeing whether this maybe brings a cultural change and whether we can listen to people who've got some expertise in this area.
So does it feel like, I mean, to me it feels a bit like the church has a chance to catch up with where people's lives were already at, if you like.
Yeah, and it's, you know, a lot of people, if we look at the stats, most people are scared by the stats of how much time people spend online. But actually, if we think about this is just the world as it is, if we're insisting that people have to come to our physical space at a certain time each week, if we go...
Oh, it just dropped out again.
And whether that's the issue. So we're here, we're back. We think we might be back. It says live on Facebook.
Are we redirecting to the Facebook Live page? Yeah.
Yep. We're back. We're here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're
Hi, folks. I'm hoping that we're here because I don't know if we're here or not. So here we go again. So in the last few weeks, Heidi Campbell, and you can tell us who Heidi is, Bex, has put together a book about this stuff, and you've written a chapter in it. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so Heidi Campbell is one of the foremost scholars, probably the foremost scholar on digital religion around the world, based at Texas A&M University. So she's done lots of work about what it means to connect with people online, what it means to do church online, what it means to be a Christian online, all this kind of thing. And so almost as soon as coronavirus hit, she had this idea for doing a book, bringing together expert voices from people who'd already been working in this context. So around about 15 ministers and about 15 scholars and theologians looking at this kind of content. So I contributed a chapter, and we had 2 weeks to think about what the point that we wanted to make, which is very unusual in kind of anything vaguely academic. And so she said, you know, can we think about what it means to be church online? What do people need to know? Is there some practical tips that we can give ministers, as well as thinking about cultural tips? And I read the other 29 essays the other night. I thought it was a really interesting collection, actually. There's quite a lot of overlaps, but also some differences in opinion. And I think one thing that's really interesting is looking at the different ways that people are experimenting online. And trying to put different ways. I mean, most of us had not heard of Zoom that long ago, and now everyone's heard of Zoom, and all the other platforms. But it's quite interesting watching people. It's a bit like at university with teaching. We're essentially doing kind of form of triage, preaching and teaching. It's not necessarily going to be the full picture that people have experimented with. But one of the things that was covered in the book was thinking about Chris Helland, who's talked about the difference between religion online, which is essentially taking services online, so really prioritising the Sunday service and thinking what that means, and online religion, where you're thinking more about what the technology allows us to do, more stuff in real time, more stuff in asynchronous form. You know, there might be people catching up on the recording of this afterwards, interactivity over straight performance. Because I think even in church, the physical space, a lot of the time it very much is a performance, isn't it? We turn up and we sit and listen to the preacher give a sermon, stand up, sit down, play a few songs, and we've just become very used to that. So we want to be thinking about, actually, are there other ways of doing church? And one of the things I argued in my piece was that faith is 24/7, and digital can help us think about things that are more outside of Sunday services. So I used to run training called Social Media for the Scared, which people used to think was social media for the sacred.
Misspelled, yeah, okay.
So just people would misread that and thinking, and you'd get people who wanted to do content online but really didn't know what to do with it. And again, we're thinking about Sunday services online. And it was more thinking about, actually, can we have groups? Can we have ways of interaction? Can we have ways of including more voices? One of the experiments I did with someone was, he sent an email and said, I want to look at this passage of the Bible. I've asked 4 of you in very different positions to give me 2 minutes, no more, of your thoughts on that. I don't want you to overthink it. It's not an academic piece, and I'm going to show those in the service, so it's not just my voice. And one of the things I think underlies a lot of what I do is, actually, the minister is responsible for what happens in the church and maybe the visionary and the lead, but I don't think they have to do everything. So looking at more devolved responsibility, and social and digital can let us do a bit more of that. And I think we're seeing a bit of that happening with churches as they've got past the first couple of weeks. People are starting to think how they can use it more creatively.
We've certainly seen that here. We've certainly seen people go from, can we just replicate church and broadcast it, to how does it change participation? But I guess I'm particularly interested in that second thing. Apart from putting our church service online, what can we learn in this time about doing faith differently? And what can we learn from the ways that people already use technology? So could we start to talk about that?
Yeah, so I think it is that big question is, how are people using technology every day so that we can interact? So one of the things that people did a lot 5-6 years ago was, we need to replicate Facebook, but as a Christian space, so we can do all of this extra stuff. And what you'd find is any kind of forum or anything that went up, it just died because it was another space that people had to go to. So if people are already on Facebook or Twitter or whatever space, if you can interact with the spaces that people are on, you're more likely to get people engaging. I always remember running one of these courses, and a guy who'd become communications officer for a church said, when he grew up, he thought that churches shut the door and basically, there was all these riotous devil worshipping almost things going on, because he said we never saw what went on the other side of the door. So actually, if we can see more about what it looks like, not only on a Sunday, but what we look like during the week as well. There's a whole thing about what does it look like to be a Christian 24/7? What does it mean to, be the person who represents your church? People who are never going to come to church, how do they engage with friends? So we had one of the ideas we had was ideas of having digi-pastors. So it was people who weren't necessarily ordained, but if you were someone who loved surfing and you're in all the surfing groups, you're essentially the representative. And it was thinking about how you did that without being clumsy. So just kind of being yourself. And I think people talk about COVID-19 as if it's going to be over soon and we're just going to go straight back to how we did it. I think this is going to take a long time before we can have large numbers of people together until we've got vaccine or herd immunity. And also, I think we've got a chance that people keep saying we've got a chance to take a breath and see what's working. So one of my things is there's very rarely a magic bullet for how any of these things work. It's going to be different for different sizes of churches, and you're going to have to experiment a little bit. And this is why I want people to talk to each other. I'd quite like to collect a lot of case studies actually about what people have actually tried, worked, and what they haven't. So I think it's thinking about, people say life as we had it was greedy, consumerist, kind of performance-based. And actually there's a chance to say we can have a different normal, but that won't happen by default. So I remember when I moved from Winchester to Durham to take a new job, and I said I wanted to try and slow down. This is any of my friends that know me will just laugh because that never happens. Nothing really slows me down properly. But he said, if you want to do that, you need to think consciously about what you're going to do, about why you want to do it, because otherwise there's no motivation for doing it. So I sometimes find it interesting that I'm in a marketing space when I don't, a lot of the time I'm thinking about cultural change. But actually churches need to think about who they're connecting with, what platforms those people are on. I see a lot of my friends posting out things because people don't have anything. Bryony Taylor, one of my friends who used to be a social media consultant, is now a minister. She has been doing dial a sermon because a lot of people in her parish don't have any form of social media. So it means she only has to do the content once. So she records it on YouTube, but people can dial in and listen to the audio of that. So a lot of that is thinking about how does that work and how do we shape the world that we're in. So it's probably quite easy to find out what your pre-existing congregation are doing. You can ask them, you can say, are you mostly using Facebook? Are you mostly using Twitter? Do you want to try Zoom? Do you want to try House Party? And people are getting those things fairly easily. If there's a reason to do something, people will learn things.
So you're a person who keeps track of how people are using technology and how that changes over time. So I'm interested to talk a bit about that because, our household is interesting. So my wife she doesn't like technology. She just got her first iPhone. We gave her one for her birthday because she wanted maps, GPS, and she wanted to take photos. She's not on Facebook. She doesn't want to be on Facebook. But because our church has done Zoom worship and Zoom small groups for a month now, 2 nights a week she's on Zoom chatting to friends, So obviously everything's changing, but what are you learning or what have you seen about how people tend to use digital communication in everyday life? What's some of the...
I think it's part of that, I think, from that comment is the idea that people will go for things if there's a purpose for doing it. So I've run quite a lot of sessions with people who are quite resistant to technology. I work with a group of higher educational organisers, and after 6 sessions we defined as success the fact that they'd all used an iPad, they'd all bought an iPad, which at the beginning was where we thought we were going to start. But because they'd learnt how to use things with the iPad, it meant they started to experiment with other things and also became less resistant to stopping anyone else using the technology. So it's not always about someone having doing the stuff themselves. So It's thinking about what's going on online. My favourite source for looking up stats about kind of what we're doing at the moment is called We Are Social. If you just put We Are Social Global Overview into Google, you'll find the 200 odd slides for that. Bearing in mind that this data and a lot of data is collected by marketing companies to work out how to target you better. But we can learn from what they're doing there, and they make the data freely available. So in Australia, out of a population of about 25, 26 million people, 22 million are internet users, and it says 18 million are social media users. So it's not everyone by any means, but it's a big amount. And of the time spent online, 1/3 of minutes spent online is spent on social media. So there's still a lot of people looking at, you know, Google and I don't know what Trade Me or eBay equivalent is over there, but they're quite high.
And it used to be the case, like I haven't seen the most recent stats, but it used to be the case that when mobile phones were introduced, when the internet was introduced, and a couple of other things I can't remember, Australia had one of the highest take-up rates in the world. So we actually seem to love technology.
Yeah, well, you've got something like 130% mobile phone ownership. So there's definitely people got more than one.
Hello?
Yeah. So, yeah, it's got something like 88% concentration of people using it. The UK is 92%. It's not that different.
Wow.
And it'd be interesting to see whether COVID-19 pushes the last kind of few people online because it's the main way to connect, or whether it's going to widen the digital divide. So I was looking at a story of what was happening in the States where they were giving school kids Chromebooks, and this kid went home, but he couldn't actually connect. He had the technology, but his mum had not paid her bill on time, so the billing company had cut her off. So he still didn't have the same experience as others. So it's thinking about that. But yeah, looking at device ownership, you kind of near universal, laptops, tablets, fairly high. There's an increasing number of people playing with smart homes and smartwatches, and only about 3% on virtual reality. But you know, that's a reasonable number for the number of population you've got. And virtual reality is growing in general. I've got a headset at home. I haven't really had time to play with it. So, you know, even people who are quite into technology are quite behind on that. I thought it was quite interesting to see that Facebook Messenger, most used messaging app in Australia, whereas the UK tends to use WhatsApp more. And that's why I got the 130% of population. And it says Australians mostly spending about 5.5 hours a day on the internet, of which about 2.5 is on mobile.
Wow.
So that's quite a lot. And you have to think that's an average number. So there's going to be some people spending hours, and there's some people going to be spending none at all. But yeah, 5 hours is a reasonably high number, although some of the research looking at children is saying it's about 8 hours for children, which is causing some concern for people. And the other bit that I quite like from the We Are Social is some of the questions that people are concerned about is about the amount of time that's being spent online, although my thinking on screen time is normally about it's the quality of what you engage with rather than the quantity, although I think quite a lot of people got Zoom fatigue potentially at the moment. So there's a lot of concern people have got about fake news. You know, we've heard in the last couple of weeks about 5G causing coronavirus and Dettol curing it from a certain high-profile person. And one of the things I'm quite concerned with as a historian is we learn about the who, what, why, where, when information comes from, so you can assess it more critically. People are starting to ask more questions about how companies are using their data, which is good because we can hold them to account more. And people have started playing with ad blocking and getting rid of cookies. We all had the whole thing about cookies. And it's...
I've been eating more of them at home, but that's because I'm locked in.
Yeah, we're all snacking more, aren't we?
Yeah.
And a lot of the concerns echo what we see in the media, and I'm sometimes not quite sure what comes first, the media headlines, or whether they're picking up what they think people will buy. And there's another question about ad blocking. It says something like 46% of people in Australia have done ad blocking. which some people think is ethical, but these sites are funded by advertising. So it'd be interesting to see if we end up with funded models. I was quite happily pay something like, I don't know, £10 a year to access Facebook with no ads. Voice is growing quite a lot. Church of England has, they've said their Alexa app has take up. So they're doing things like the prayer of the day and things like that on there. They've just taken content that's already there. If you want to know what the most used social media platforms in Australia, YouTube at the top, followed by Facebook, Facebook Messenger, Instagram. All those Facebook and Instagram are all owned by Facebook. WhatsApp, Twitter, Pinterest, Snapchat, LinkedIn, Skype, Reddit, Twitch, which is some kind of gamer site, WeChat, Tumblr, Viber, and TikTok. Although I suspect if they do the numbers at the end of this year, TikTok will be a lot bigger. Especially people taking out all their bins. That's been the big thing that Australia's gifted to the world.
Sorry?
Have you seen? There's a Facebook group I joined where, because people can't go out, they've been dressing up in like prom gear and ball gowns and taking their bins out, and Australians have got very creative with this.
I had no idea.
Put that on TikTok as well. And that part of my interest is I've been watching TikTok on and off for a few weeks. It's supposed to be a lip syncing and kind of dance challenge.
Yeah, I've seen it. It's not pretty.
Yeah. But I've seen a couple of people playing with kind of Christian content on there. It only works if it fits the vibe, and a couple of them do. So lots going on online.
So we're going to move to talking about discipleship in a second. So I mean, the picture that you've painted, and I think we kind of knew it, but in the sense that whether the church likes it or not, Australians like being connected digitally, and we've all got exceptions. Oh yes, my mother's 90 and she hasn't got the internet, kind of thing, which is true.
Yeah. But we need to not forget those people.
Yes, absolutely. But we don't. I guess we as a church don't choose how they connect, do we?
No.
So if we're starting to talk discipleship in the digital world. Maybe we'll come to this later. In one sense, it doesn't start with us. It doesn't start with what I want to tell people in one sense. But we can come to that. So where we were going to start, because we do have notes, folks, this is planned, is that we see discipleship both as a communal thing and as an individual thing. And we've tended to think the communal thing is what happens when you come together in church or in a church group, and the individual is what happens when you go home, or you go to work or uni or whatever. Yeah. But that doesn't seem to fit the technology at all, does it? I mean, and there's a fear with that face-to-face communal is good, individual technology is bad kind of things. There's tension at the moment. We're seeing in a whole bunch of ways, in the ways that we're trying to be church. So talk to us let's start talking about discipleship anyway. How do you start to think about discipleship in a digital world?
So the nice, simple explanation I found was from Billy Graham. It says a disciple is simply someone who believes in Jesus and seeks to follow him in his or her daily life. So I like that. It's quite simple. It fits quite a lot of ways of being. And, when we're thinking about things are never as black and white as we think. So I've given quite a lot of talks where I've quite enjoyed looking at Romans 12, 1-2 in the Message version, which is, so here's what I want you to do, God's helping you. Take your everyday, ordinary life, your sleeping, eating, going to work and walking around life, and place it before God as an offering. Embracing what God does for you is the best thing you can do for him. Don't become so well adjusted to your culture that you fit into it without even thinking. Instead, fix your attention on God, and then you will change inside out, and we'll be able to change the culture around you, is the general gist of that. And so I see our digital is very much a part of our everyday lives. And one of the problems that we tend to see is because it's so much an everyday part of our life, we don't think about who shapes it, how we shape it, how we use it. We very rarely ask questions about it. It's become, apart from kind of fearful questions, and there's a lot of opportunities there as well. So we want to look at what we're doing, what the affordances and constraints are. So what does it let us do and what does it not let us do? If we think about another form of technology, it's quite useful to think about a microphone lets you speak to 15,000 people, but you can't have a private conversation with one person unless you turn it off. That doesn't mean it's good or bad. It just has certain shapes. And one way to explain that to people sometimes is you could take a brick, it has a certain shape and function, but you can choose what you do with it. You chuck it through a window or you build a house with it. So I very much see the online as real. As Christians, we're embodied when we use this space. I am sat in front of this computer. I'm talking into it. I'm using my mouth. I quite often will use my fingers on the keyboard. So we're very much connected while we're doing it. And more we've got this kind of digitally embodied form of ourselves in video form. I've never liked phones. I don't like not being able to see people's faces, so I quite like being able to do this. So there's a real space thinking about that. And then if we think about online communities, Tim Hutchings has done most of the work on this, did his PhD looking at St Pixels and iChurch, which have been around for quite a long time, are still going. And he found the people in there were either very much the people who wouldn't attend physical church for physical or mental health reasons, or they'd been damaged by the church in some ways, and this was a kind of safe way to step back in. And some people did it on top of other forms of church. So that fear that it's going to replace face-to-face church, it kind of hasn't proved true. And actually, when you're not able to meet physically, it's really powerful to be able to meet, whether it's Zoom or YouTube. And it's quite interesting looking at what people are doing now. One of the essays in Heidi's book was a group of churches who were looking at how were they going to reach kind of 18 different communities, some of whom were just totally panicked by the idea of going online. And originally they were saying, well, this church is more professional, so we can just share this content to every other church. And someone said, hang on, it's a really unsettling, scary time at the moment. What do we think our congregation needs? Which I think is the most important question all the time. And they want a bit of normality. They want to see the face that they normally see every week. So even if the content is less polished, you know, it breaks down in the middle of 3 times at the beginning of when you're trying to do it.
Yeah.
It gives some kind of connection. So that the idea of that is kind of hyper local. So there's still a sense of connecting locally. One of the other essays in the book looked at, said we've got people joining from other churches who don't live anywhere near us. They now feel they're part of our church. How do we include them when we go back to whatever we do afterwards? And is that okay? So it's thinking beyond that. Is it, you know, education technology and church researchers found that we've become very used to sit back and listen. And digital gives, we talked about this a bit earlier, didn't we? There's still a space to get more engaged. Research has shown that people still like preaching. They still like lectures. There's a place for that. Yeah. But there's a place to mix it up a bit more, whether that's people doing things on post-it notes, which they can then stick on Instagram as some kind of creative challenge. And it just adds another dimension. And for some people, they think, oh, if you're taking a photo of it, you're not very present. You're not enjoying what's in front of you. For some people, it does. And look back at things.
I wonder if part of our reaction to this kind of use of communication is that for most of us growing up, what we saw on the screen was produced television. It was broadcast. It wasn't real. It wasn't in real time. We weren't communicating back to someone. And so there's a sense that it's fake, you know, or it's coming from, it's disconnected from my experience, and I only engage for entertainment. Whereas here, as you said before, you're not a virtual person, you're a real person. I'm a real person. And our communication is mediated through technology, but it doesn't make you, you know, like you're not an actor on a screen that was recorded whenever. And I guess it's why I don't like the word virtual, because I think it's real. And I'd rather talk about things being mediated in some way and recognise that I mean, and you referred to it then, so much of our communication is mediated,
Yep.
but what we seek through communication is meaning. We seek connection, is the word you used,
Yep.
something deep and real.
And a letter that you write, that's mediated communication, but that's seen as a real form of communication because you're on a physical letter, and it's, in some ways that's more prized now because all we get in the post these days is a few bills. We rarely get anything particularly interesting. So I've kind of gone out of my way to send more postcards, even if I haven't gone anywhere. And I've seen, that's been one of the nice ideas I've seen online actually, is someone said she's been sending her grandkids postcards that she found in the attic from all the trips she'd been on over her life, and told her kids about the trips she'd been on in the past, because obviously no one can go anywhere at the moment. And it is that sense of kind of online and offline are very blurred and blended. So if I had made it to Australia next week, we've already talked online for years. So I wouldn't be turning up going, "Hi, I'm Bex."
Yeah. That's right.
Carrying on the conversation.
Right. In fact, we're in the same conference at Kent, and I didn't meet you. So we've been in the same, not only the same city, the same event, and didn't meet. So that's right.
Yeah. So it's about sort of connecting, and obviously one of the things that some of the people on the group will know is that the last 2-3 years I've been dealing with cancer. And my online groups for cancer, those people are, real friends. And particularly now I've got incurable cancer, so I'm in a group with people with incurable cancer. People die on a really regular basis, and you feel really sad. You've never met them. And one of the things I was thinking today is one of my friends died about 4 weeks ago. And we used to play Pokemon together. So she still comes up on my Pokemon screen when I'm going out for a walk. And I think of her every day because I haven't deleted her from that. So there's that kind of reality. And just, I've effectively self-isolated whilst I've had chemotherapy twice over the last couple of years. So I'm super grateful for my online community, but it's not just an online community. People see that I need something, they post it to me, they come round, they empty my dishes, they empty the bins. And it's that kind of, how do you look to people? And one of the things that's been really lovely while I've been over here is my friend Andrew. I've talked to him every morning, and he's just trying to help keep me sort of mentally anchored in the midst of all this when you're miles from home. But he's also been and checked on my post. He took my car to have it, I don't know what you call it in Australia, it's MOT.
Registration stuff, is it? Okay.
Yeah, so fitness for driving. So when I get back next week, it's already been to the garage, it's already had more than 3 days of someone else sat in it, and then I can use that to get to hospital when I go back and start my treatment. And I think, that there's real power in that community. And I think the idea that it's individual online comes from a lot of early research, which we looked at, geek sitting in the back room, never coming out, very pale. All that kind of stereotypical idea has persisted throughout what we've been doing. Whereas what I've quite often tried to encourage people to do in my training is say, when we talk about social media, most people panic about the media and say, I don't do technology. Whereas actually, if you can focus on the social and the communication, then we can think about how we do that. And it doesn't have to be perfect. Like we said about TV, we've got this standard up here. It doesn't have to be like that.
Yes.
And it's if you meet someone, when we managed to go back to face-to-face meeting on a Sunday, I found the conversations changed. So instead of meeting someone, you say, what did you do during the week? It was like, oh, I saw on your Facebook you've done X, Y, and Z. And you change the conversation. That doesn't make it better or worse. It just changes it. I was going to say, I'll give you my favourite quote by Sonia Livingstone, who wrote this in 2009. Even though face-to-face communication can be angry, negligent, resistant, deceitful, and inflexible, somehow it remains the ideal against which mediated communication is judged as flawed. So we're not saying that going online is the same as meeting face-to-face, but we're saying it's got its own benefits and drawbacks, and we want to work out which of those bits we want to use, and just stop blaming the phones for everything that's going wrong in the world at the moment.
That's a great quote.
Yeah, I love it. So I'm sure anyone who's heard me before is bored of me saying it, because I bring it out at pretty much every talk I do.
I mentioned before my wife who doesn't do Facebook, etc. Her comment about our church's online Zoom worship and the Zoom home group that she's a part of now, that was meeting on Zoom, is that it's been a much better sharing experience, because you're not sitting looking at the back of people's heads. Yep. When people pray together and talk about what their concerns are, everyone gets a voice. People spend time differently and probably share a bit more equally. So yes, it'll be interesting to see what happens when we go back, because I think, and we think it will be a more blended thing of online offline church. I'm going to we want to talk in a bit more detail about beliefs and faith practices and stuff like that, but I'm wondering if Duncan's got some questions that he might feed in our direction.
Yeah, sure. One of the first ones that came up earlier was the sense that we have been using online media to replicate the other forms of media that don't require online media. And it's taking us a while to realise that there actually are new opportunities that are now possible, that we're actually moving into a new stage of engagement with each other. Have you got any comments on that?
I was going to say, I think that fits with the research that Heidi's done, where she said, research into digital has gone through phases of kind of excitement until we reach a stage that it's kind of normal thing, and actually we realise that these tools have their own pros and cons, and we can start to experiment with them a bit more. And so I think watching people, where are we, sort of 4 or 5 weeks into people having to go online? But I think it would be really interesting to look at a selection of how those have changed as people, there was a panic reaction the first week. It's just, we've got to get this content online. Some people were trying to replicate everything they were doing and were exhausted by the end of the first week. And I think people have got a chance to experiment and find out what works, and, talk to the congregation, say, did you like that? I think it'd be interesting to see, we were talking about the house groups, which tend to be smaller, which I think works for Zoom. I think once you've got over about 12, 15 people in a group, it gets quite hard to manage. And you've got a chance to embed the house group maybe more with the church as a whole, and see the Sunday as bringing some of the thinking together for that. And one of the things, so I used to run this thing called the Big Bible Project, which we did Lent studies for 3 years, but a lot of digital literacy as well. And one of the things we liked was putting content out that house groups could use, and then they could be fed back in with questions. So there was a two-way conversation going on. So, and you could have people from different denominations who may have very different questions. And something I've seen a Baptist minister do that I quite liked was, he told people what he was going to be preaching on a Sunday, and put some stuff on the church Facebook group during the week to ask people what questions they had about it, what they wanted to know, shaped that, and then got some feedback the next week. He said it's quite a lot of extra work, so he didn't feel like he could do it every week, but he was going to try and do it every month, because he thought it kind of shaped. And as people got more used to being able to contribute, works a bit easier as well.
Mm-hmm. Another question was, the reference we made earlier to the pressure to be performing, and not just performing, but performing with perfection, to provide a polished performance without any gaps, without any pauses, to have everything working just right, because of our concern about, people will just go somewhere else if they don't think it's up to scratch.
Yeah.
Have you got any thoughts about getting over performance anxiety? And the other thought is that came through is that there's always performance in face-to-face as well.
Yeah, I think, what we do, people say, oh, it's more authentic when you're face-to-face. And I said, well, I put thought into when I go out. I tend not to go to the supermarket in my pyjamas.
Yeah.
Today I've put a slightly smarter dress on than the T-shirt I've been wearing while I've been writing. so there is a certain amount of performance. One of the concerns that we've got used to is with filters and all this kind of thing, that there's a lot of pressure for performance online. But I think that was already coming from advertising, and actually we've got a chance to kick back at that. I'm quite enjoying seeing people rolling around in their dressing gowns. Just saying, actually, do you know what? I'm just going to talk to you. This kind of fireside chats I've been seeing people doing as preaching rather than all the robes. Bring me back to the question. It was about
and performance anxiety is part of that as well.
Yeah, and I get that. I said to you while we were setting up the sound before this, I suddenly feel like I've forgotten everything that I've thought about for the last 24 hours when we were thinking about what we might talk about. And we didn't know if the technology would work, and it failed on us 3 times at the beginning. But we found a way to kind of get back on. Yeah. And so I think if those of us who work in technology can say, we've got enough confidence to just sit with that and say, hang on, we'll be back in a minute. It shows people that it doesn't have to be perfect, and we don't need to be at TV production levels. Mm-hmm. It's about meaning, it's about communication, it's about sincerity.
Yeah. And the other questions, there's quite a lot of questions and comments about the need for connectivity and how that might reshape our thinking of discipleship. Not just an individualistic thing, but a communal thing. And I'm sure we're going to talk more about that.
Yeah, we are actually.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just trying to track where we were up to. Bex, do you want to answer, or do you want to say that for the next section where we're going to talk about that?
Well, it might come back up again. I'm quite used to talking about something and then coming to it and go, I talked about that earlier. And I think for quite a long time we've thought about things like, but when I looked at the Big Bible Project, we said, years ago, very oral culture, people would sit around and talk about the Bible. And then once we had printed content, you started to read your own book. And Bible study and prayer became a very kind of individualistic thing that you do. So there is a chance to kind of bring that back to more of a communal thing, but you need to be quite intentional about that. YouVersion, the Bible app that obviously lots of people use, is set up quite nicely. You can connect with your friends, you can do Bible studies together, you can share what you're doing, it shows every highlight you've done, and people can connect with that. I'm not sure it's massively used, but that functionality is there. And I have a prayer app which people can tell me stuff, and I put the prayer in there, and every day it gives me 6 different things to pray for, so it makes sure in rotation everything's prayed for. That still feels quite individual. But then online I might post, so I've gone out of my way in some respects to try and show that cancer is different from the media perception of it, and I've tried to show when I've had good days and bad days, and almost particularly the bad, I guess the good days are a bit of a thankful prayer, the bad days are a bit of a, life's really hard, and I might be praying to God in this kind of way, but also actually in connecting with people online, there's a potential that someone can help me either with my mental or physical health in a way. So it is rethinking that kind of connection, and how much we need it. And people who've been, there's some people who've definitely been stuck with their families rather than enjoying being with their families over the last few weeks. When I go home, I'll be on my own in the house. At least while I've been in Auckland, I've been in a bubble with Chaplin's family. So I'll be even more reliant on online for that connection. And there's a chance to do, I can do Bible studies with people online. I can do prayer online. We can share a whole lot more of our lives online if we want to. And we don't have to do all of that in the public space. So you can have I've got a group of kind of 15 people that when I'm having a really bad day, that doesn't go on the public stuff. It's a smaller group, and I trust that group not to share that content anywhere else. So it's about using different elements of it.
Bex, I'd want to say that the parts of your story that you've shared publicly, I've found quite both moving and challenging because of your honesty of the up and down. And I think it probably reflects that I don't see that authenticity enough from people, maybe.
Yeah.
But I've also found it connects with the story of my own family as well. So having lost a brother from brain cancer, it's just kind of, so I think when we get to the depth of the human story, we connect with people in a way that, whether it forms community or expresses community, whatever, it's the depth and authenticity of the story that matter, not the medium in one sense. I guess that's what I'm trying to say, and I've appreciated that, seeing that, how you've been going. So we've started. This is a good segue into the next bit. We were going to have a 5-minute break, but I'm worried that we had so much trouble starting that we might lose everybody. So if we're happy to plough on for the next half hour, is that okay?
I'm happy.
Okay, all right.
People can always come back and check the recording.
I think, yeah. So there's a common phrase here around the church that the discipleship is about belonging, believing, and behaving. And I thought we could maybe talk about digital discipleship through those three lenses.
Yeah.
So the behaving one is really about discipleship is something that you do, and there are habits or practices of being disciples that we grow in. And so the question is, how does a 24/7 digital world, or how can a 24/7 digital world help with our discipleship behaviours, or learning them or expressing them?
Yeah, I mean, again, there's no magic thing that it's going to do. It's going to change them a bit, but every medium that we do things through is going to change that, whether it's sitting and reading. One of the things that people quite often say about screen time addiction is that's terrible, but if you sat and read a book for 6 hours, everyone would think that was great.
Yeah.
So it's kind of thinking through that. But Chris Rogers has set up a website called wearemakingdisciples.com. He's a minister in the UK who likes to dress up as Star Wars characters.
We've got a couple like that too. They may even be watching.
Yeah. So, but it's thinking about, what he categorised inner and outer shapes. So outer is demonstrating Jesus to the rest of the world, sharing our faith, praying for the sick, of being service to the poor, meeting people's needs, generosity, fighting injustice, and holy living. And then saying more internal is Bible study, prayer, meditating on God, worship, sacrament, fasting, seeking forgiveness, reflection, fellowship, submission. Different people will think slightly different things, but I thought that was quite an interesting collection. And I think for digital, like everything, it can provide new ways of doing things, new ways of doing old things, and new ways of doing new things. And they might not all emerge by magic. If we think about mobile phone, texting has become one of the biggest things we do on it, but it was never designed for that. That was a side product. So things may emerge that we don't know about. And a lot of the time we have to remember it's amplifying our pre-existing culture and what we think is important. So what it offers and what you might be prepared to accept might change with your theology. So you made a joke at the beginning about we're not going to try and do communion, but that and tweeting in church were the two big topics that always took off when I was doing big projects. And I guess if your belief is that Bible bread and wine has to be done by a minister, and that it's transubstantiation, so literal transformation into blood and the body, you will feel that this cannot be done at home. If more like, I grew up in a brethren church, so there was no minister anyway, although it was always the men that did the bread and the wine, but it was very much a symbolic thing. So therefore it doesn't need, so there's two very different theologies there. And the example I actually quite often give to people is that in the Australian outback, there's people who've been taking communion on the radio for years. They've not been coming to a physical space. So kind of what's different about people doing this online, particularly if you do it at the same time, it's still a communal thing. So that can be a challenge.
Yeah, okay. So what's the next topic?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't want to. Let's.
But I think there's different opinions and different people.
There are, yeah. I'd love to talk about. We'd have to make it another session, I reckon.
Yeah. Yeah.
You mentioned apps, 24/7 apps and stuff like that.
Yeah. So where are we?
I've got prayer apps. I know people who use prayer apps. I try them. They kind of don't work for me. Can we talk a bit about apps? Yeah.
Yeah. So for years I've tried different things with prayer. I tried putting names in a bowl and pulling them out of a hat and all kinds of things. But I've become very used, particularly since my brain has gone a bit fizzy since I've had chemotherapy. I've become very reliant on my to-do list on my phone.
Okay.
So I put in my phone, I put Bible and prayer. So I go to the prayer app and I've used it every day pretty much for probably 2-3 years. Nothing had managed to make me stick with daily prayer before that.
Okay.
So it works for different people. So YouVersion has had quite a big impact on people, I think. They've had millions and millions of downloads, funded by, US people with lots of money. And then online games, that people can play with for children and for adults. I'm not a big gamer. It's not really my thing. I do the kind of Candy Crush level of gaming. But I've had someone try and encourage me. There was a game to think about how refugees are coping.
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of play as a refugee, and it was the closest you could kind of get to empathy. So each of these has been built by someone who's kind of seen a need. Sometimes they might just want to make money. Some of them can be a bit cringy, but I think that's a bit like, Christian fiction. Some of it's great, and some of it you feel like Jesus has been shoehorned into the narrative, and people do the same online. But it's thinking about, how do you actually do that? And you don't necessarily need a specific Christian app to do things. So I might end up using a to-do list to do my Christian activity, but I don't need a special app that I can put my Christian any more than, I set up Facebook and I decide I'm going to be the face of God for my friends and I chuck Bible verses at them willy-nilly. I think most people would defriend me in about 5 minutes. So it's thinking about social media is very much about listening, two-way. Apps less two-way, they're more kind of functional potentially. Apps went out of fashion a bit a few years ago because people started just putting their websites online.
Yeah, sure.
So you need to think about whether you can really do something with an app, and think about, YouVersion lets you study Bible with others. The Big Read gave you an opportunity to chat with people from another denomination and see different ways of thinking. And it's part of that is, I remember giving a talk to a Catholic group once and saying, when I go online, I'm trying to work my hardest and not get offended at things. So if we're going to engage with conversations with people who have different thinking, like the communion thinking, how can we have those kind of conversations with grace and show that we can live together with differences of doing things and differences of opinions, listening to people, being prepared to ask and offer for help, and then thinking about how we do practical things. So again, food banks, there may be apps that help do that. And I know there's definitely one, I can't remember the name of it now, I've just thought about that. So you could give money and they would give it to certain food banks. So it made it really easy to give. You just press a couple of buttons, it would connect to PayPal or something like that. And the easier you make it for people, the easier that they're going to use it. But I've seen food banks make excellent use of Facebook at the moment. The one where I live, it posts up maybe once a month and says we're running short on milk and pasta. So that's the thing we've got a particular shortage of. Has anyone got this? Someone really needs it. And it's a really easy way to, just connect using the platforms people are using. And social justice issues. One of the things that I've written in my book, I'm trying to find a new example for, is the riots that happened in London were blamed on blackberries. And that's what we tend to hear about. Social media has helped, terrorism and riots and all these kind of things. But what you tend not to hear is they also help with the cleanup. People got together, got their brooms together, cleaned up. I've seen in the UK, the clapping at 8 o'clock every Thursday evening for the NHS has all been organised through Facebook. And it's just someone having an idea. And sometimes that idea might come from the top and might be an expensive marketing campaign. Other times it's just someone has a nice idea and it flies. There's a certain amount of luck as to what flies and what doesn't. So you could put a lot of money in something and people don't bother. So you know, there's the everyday apps that you can use as reminders to make part of a healthy life that's spiritually healthy in every kind of way. And then there's the specialist Christian apps and games. Some great games that get kids engaged with the Bible and they don't really realise they're engaging with the Bible because they're just playing a game. Sometimes we've got to get our heads past the idea that we might be wasting time online. That's okay sometimes. We're allowed to have some fun.
Yeah. I've found... I can think of a whole bunch of different ways in which I've seen social media connect people in fantastic ways. So when we were in South Australia, there was a thing called Grow Free, where people would put fruit and veg outside their house, stuff that they'd grown. Just in the last few months here in churches or houses, people would put a book library at the end of their driveway, you know, take a book or take some food or stuff like that. So many stories being told of, you know, both simple and more complex acts of kindness that, and as you were saying before, it doesn't have to be, look, here's the Christian version and here are the regular people. It's actually about participating in community. So I guess one of the questions, and I'm trying to watch some of these things flying past as well, is that you mentioned access earlier on, and I find whenever people talk about you could do this online, someone will say, oh, but people can't do, you know, not all our people use Facebook, or not everyone's got electricity, or something like that, as if you can't make everyone do it, no one should do it. So we are going to talk about belonging in a minute, but in fact, when are we talking? I don't know. But that thing of, you know, if discipleship is about behaviours and digital communication gives us some options about ways that we practice behaviours or extend our behaviours. Can we talk about the access thing there, or the inclusion thing there? You know, what's it mean to a congregation? Are they going to say, look, you all have to use this and then we'll all be growing in Jesus? Because every day at 9 a.m. So I signed up for an app once, and the minister would send a like the verse for the day at 6 a.m. So my phone started going off at 6 a.m. and it'd be a random verse from Leviticus or something, you know, which was not a great way to start the day, I'd have to say. So anyway.
I haven't really thought about the purpose, has it? Remind me.
The question was about access in relation to, I mean, you would have people talk about, you know, we can't get access to this or not allow people to have access to that. Like, how do you respond to those comments?
Yeah, I mean, it's a debate that's been happening in the educational technology community for, you know, I've been in that community for maybe 12, 13 years. And they tend to have the conversations maybe about 2 years before the church does. So there's and what a lot of universities have done have ended up giving students devices, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's equitable access. You know, you've got a device, but do you know how to use it?
Yes.
Have you got enough money to use it? And I guess if you really want people to do that, then you have to have funds and training. If you think that's important. But I'm not great on, you know, having regulated stuff anyway. It's more about how do you get the conversation going amongst members rather than having all this stuff coming from the top. But there can be a space for that. At the moment, I think very much the stuff coming from the top is going on the notice board, the notice sheet, on Facebook, on, you know, every platform you can think of, and it's quite a lot of work for people. So it would make it easier if everyone was using the same thing. But I don't think so. One of the things I was trying to encourage people to do was things like social media drop-ins at churches. or IT drop-in. So you get members of the church who knew what you were doing. You'd sit someone at the door who was kind of your triage nurse, and they would say, what do you need help with? And the people in the room, this person knows how to do websites, this person knows how to do Facebook.
Yep.
And you'd get the congregation helping each other out on sort of certain set times, people giving each other old devices. In some ways, I'm thinking it's a bit like, there's a charity in the UK called Home for Good, which is about encouraging churches as a whole to help families foster and adopt children. So they said, there's X thousand number of children on the list. If the church has supported one family in each church by maybe buying them a bigger house, or helping them with their grocery shopping or with their internet connection, then the whole church is helping that child, but that family. And I'm thinking you could do similar with digital, couldn't you? You could have someone in the church who's prepared to help someone else pay for their phone line, so they've got access. It's all part of the bigger debate about is digital like water? Should it be a right? Is it a human right for everyone at that? Because if you can't use it, and if you can't use it well, so most of the debates now, 5-6 years ago, the debate was, have people got the technology tool?
Yes.
The debate now is, have people got the skills and enough money to access it well? Because people will say, in the UK, you can go to the library and use a computer there, but you get 2 hours. And if you've got to do your homework, you've got no time to do the fun stuff, so you're missing out on your kind of social connections. So it's a bit radical for some organisations, I think, but it's a possible way of doing it.
So I think part of my question with that stuff is, it seems to me for churches, look, we're serious about discipling and we want to help people grow as disciples, not just at our times, at our places, in our building. Then if you care about access and inclusion, you have to provide multiple mediums. You have to provide multiple opportunities, and that's, don't just go one way or the other. Is that the way for churches to live? We need to.
Yeah, and it's thinking about what you need to invest in, because we've got to recognise that if you're doing this thing over here, you haven't got time necessarily to do this thing over here. Yeah. And you've got to think about, are you discipling your current congregation, or are you trying to reach out to a new potential congregation? And to a certain extent, you've got to allocate the resources to that. And so there'll be some things. I remember going to an event and someone said, oh, we're a small church, just 300 people. And this was an American speaking at a UK event. Yeah. 300 people is quite a big church actually over here. Or in the UK. So I think my brain's just gone down a rabbit hole.
That's fine. I'm watching. It's okay. So let's talk about belief. We talked about behaving a bit. Let's talk about belief and how churches can explore belief in online environments. Yep. And there are a couple of things there. One is, the internet's full of rubbish. If we just let people out of the internet, they could find out any crazy idea and believe it. But also, how do church leaders actually engage people in exploring belief online in a way that is not just crazy free for all, or is that just not possible?
Well, I think this is part of the mix between kind of secular and sacred space again, isn't it? So belief, if we're thinking at the moment, the 5G causing coronavirus and the data and all the fake news, if we see part of our church job as helping our community to be critical thinkers and good citizens of our community, then we want people thinking critically about the Bible and about stuff that they see elsewhere. And my mantra has kind of been, if my faith can't hold up to some of the questions I've got to ask it, it's not worth having it. So it's part of that is making a space where people are comfortable taking any question, and knowing that the minister or whoever they've asked might say, I don't know, I want to go and have a think about that, or you go and have a think about it. That's a classic educational line. You go and have a think about it, you do the work and come back, and then we'll have a chat about it. So yeah, it's thinking about how you go with that. But it's trying to think, information everywhere is full of rubbish. Online, it's much easier. The barriers to entry to putting rubbish information online are really low. Some of it's fun, some of that's okay. Some of it's dangerous and just fluffy. And I've been really interested watching the social media platforms who before have stood back and said, we're like the post office. We don't control the information that goes through, to taking a really proactive stance, particularly around coronavirus information. And they've shown they can do it because they're using algorithms and artificial intelligence. So I think it's about making sure you can't control what everyone else does, what everyone else looks at, but you can teach people to think about critical thinking, the who, what, where, why, when. That's a classic historian 5 W's. And you can think about what your values are, what the church stands for. Most churches have got a mission statement. How does what you're doing fit with that? Most people who come to your church probably align with that mission statement. And think about leading by example. I did a paper a few years ago looking at this guy called Wenger who does communities of practice.
Yeah.
So everyone is learning from each other, but maybe the person who's a little bit ahead has to dive in and swim, show everyone what it's like, show people by example. Still, one of the biggest things I'm writing in this book is parents need to show by example. So I think ministers got to ask people good questions, give them good resources, talk about the online within the sermon because it's part of everyday life. It's not this thing over here. Encourage people to participate. Steve Fogg, who is also in Melbourne, who I was also going to come and see when I was staying with you, he does quite a lot of content about online church, and one of the first people I met who had the job title of social media pastor. It was actually, and so part of his job every week was to get up and say the hashtag we're using for the church is this. You can take pictures of this kind of people. I don't know, anyone wearing this kind of lanyard doesn't want their picture. No one under 16 can be in pictures. My brother's church live streams the service, and they say if you sit in these 10 rows here, you won't appear on camera. So it's giving people quite...
Okay.
So it's showing people that it's quite normal to live stream. But they get 50 to 100 people watching online as well, people who can't get there. And think about how you can engage the congregation asynchronously and throughout the week. How do you play with a bit of that, and do you see that as part of what will work for your church and your role? And I find it quite, one of the things I was thinking about while I was writing some notes about this is there's a big debate about whether God fits around us or whether we're supposed to fit around God. Is it a good discipline to go to church on a Sunday morning every week? Is it a discipleship practice? Or actually, does God want to meet us wherever we are? And how do you get a balance between being... It's very easy to stop going to church. I haven't really been properly for 2.5 years. I started off physically not able to go, but I didn't belong to a physical church, so I've just been joining them online. I'm quite looking forward to joining a few on Zoom and feeling like I belong to that church and then going physically when they reopen. So it's a lot about that giving responsibility, to devolve responsibility, isn't it?
Well, I mean, it's interesting that we come back to talking about kind of relational connection online, and I'm just wondering whether part of the responsibility of a church is to say we want to provide the social network in which you can explore belief. Yes, you can search for information. We think belief is shaped in a community, and so whether it's our community or another one, we want you to find a kind of a trustworthy place in which you can question and everything else. But I'm very conscious that for church leaders, it feels like a loss of control.
Yeah.
And we could say that's reflected in the communion discussion too, but we're not having that discussion. It's about theology. But yeah. So I suppose the question for me there is, how much is social media about social, and how much is it about content? And for most of us, does the social come first?
I think it just ends up, I'm thinking about my own social media. It's a real mix of information and just chatting to people. And church can be a bit like that. You have the sermon and then you have the chatting to people afterwards, unless we have the little 5 minutes in the middle when you which the extroverts love and the introverts hate. Introduce yourself to the person next to you and all that kind of thing.
Not anymore. No. No more passing the piece or anything like that. We should throw to Duncan for a question or two, and then we're going to see what the next bit is.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of energy around this question of how children are engaging with our mediated experiences, and what do we need to avoid? What do we need to ensure that is built into how we operate? That's a big question
For children.
for children, yeah, and obviously their family connections as well.
Yeah, because it's interesting watching at the moment, isn't it? Because I think the impression I'm getting is churches are just about managing to do their normal Sunday service and not the children's bit, or they're just doing the children's bit and the parents have to do the children's activities as well. So there's a question about kind of how that's involved. So what I hope more people realise these days is most social media platforms shouldn't be owned by anyone until they're 13. So they shouldn't really have their own space. WhatsApp is officially 16, but I've seen it's the first platform my nieces and nephews were given at 8 or 9, but they're only allowed to connect with certain people. So I think there's a space to have a bit of fun. So one of the things I've really loved while I've been ill is my niece drawing pictures for me. And then, she drew one for me out here, and then the posters stopped coming to New Zealand, so she took a picture of it, and my sister-in-law posted that to me. So she's getting to learn how to use online without having her own space. So by the time she gets there, she knows how to use it for herself. So, ministers can ask for that kind of asynchronous input from children. Children draw a picture and then your parents can hold it up and those kind of things. If you're thinking about the kind of Sunday services, it's about who does it and who it's aimed at. I've watched quite a few churches doing a YouTube and then a Zoom afterwards. So a lot of that is probably wrapped up in safety questions, isn't it? So one of the things that it's a real shame actually, because church people tend to trust people in church more. It's actually a problem, an area where we can have more problems with children being approached by inappropriate people. So much so I like to look at the opportunities rather than the risks. The risks have to be managed. And so that's where I think you need to know who's joining and who's engaging, whether that's the physical space or online. Does that seem to answer any of what that question is?
I think so. And the other angle, of course, which is about parents who are wondering about how they engage with that.
Yeah, I think it's the bit that I put at the end of my book was do it with them for technology. Do it with them. No, do it for them. Do it with them. Watch them as they do it for themselves, and then let them do it. And I think seeing stuff like that happening online, I've got some stuff at the end of my book about youth leaders engaging with young people, and it's really opened up the conversation for some really deep questions that people have. One of the things that happens that you end up with bullying online because of disinhibition of the screen, people forget that there's someone on the other side of the screen, has also opened up the opportunity for people to ask difficult questions, talk to someone else they feel safe. So one of the things I've tried to say to people about children is either try and make sure you're talking to your child so they feel they can come and ask you questions, and they can ask you questions about what they're seeing from church online as much as anything else, or make sure there's an older peer that they may want to engage with if they don't insist they engage with you. I'm not sure if that's really helping with the question that people ask. I'm trying to work out what.
No, that's great. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I think Bex, some people have questions that are specifically around children in worship.
Yeah.
Which you started off there,
Yeah.
which obviously is a different kind of question from all the other stuff that kids can access that might be helpful or unhelpful. So
Yeah.
I want to jump to, it's 2:25. I want to jump to the last part, which was really what might church leaders do in this weird time to explore digital practices, if you like, on a better term, in a way that might actually help us be church differently in positive ways, So I guess that's what interests me, This is a time for trying new stuff.
Yeah.
Can we take the focus? Can we make it broader than just Sunday morning worship? Because that's, apart from that. So, what would you want to be encouraging church leaders to do, or asking them to do, or whatever?
So I think people there's a chance to think about what you want your church to do, because you want what you end up doing to fit what you want your church to do. So I think there's fine time to experiment. Don't worry if it goes wrong. But like within higher education, there's always, every university seems to want to do the same pilot project. And you're like, well, someone else has already done this. They've proven it's worked in their space. So actually, how do we get some kind of space? I think Heidi's group is a great place to start for some suggestions. But there's also groups online for people who are working in church comms, church ministry. And the more you can share that, the more that maybe takes some of that load off that digital is giving you. The Sunday sermon is sort of quite often feels like an individual pursuit. So someone's just bought me some food.
Just pass it over, can you? Pass the pepper.
I'm just weighing out. Yeah, I sometimes, when I see how much time people put into the Sunday sermon, I'm thinking, where's the space for other things to happen, the kind of more pastoral ministry, potentially. Digital can allow us to do things like engage with someone who's ill on a short-term basis, knowing that other times face-to-face is more appropriate. So it's that blend again, isn't it? How do you involve the congregation, whether that's real-time, pre-records? And thinking about one of my favourite stories that came through on Big Bible Project was outside, there was a church next to a school, which happens quite a lot in the UK, lots of church schools. And it was raining, and the church invited some of the mums in for a cup of coffee, and they just had having a chat. There was no specific evangelistic aim to any of this. And it ended up being a kind of tea and chat group that then migrated onto Facebook, so people talked all week, and then they'd meet up, in the building 2 or 3 times a week. And something like 3/4 of that group ended up being church members, because they felt that it was a genuine offer. There was no kind of, you can only come here if you're going to sit and listen to Jesus kind of thing, which quite often I think evangelism can feel like. We might think he's the best thing since sliced bread, but most people think he's irrelevant or don't think about him at all. But also I think, so, here at Vaughan Park, Sapati, who's the chaplain, whose son just bought me some food, he wanted to do something online, hasn't done anything online here. But we were really, the first couple of weeks, just totally overwhelmed by the amount of stuff that was going on online. And just said, we don't really want to add to the noise. So we sat down and thought about what Vaughan Park stood for. It stands for generous hospitality, a space to recover, to rest, to revitalise, education, all kind of happening here. So he's just set up an Instagram account, Vaughan Park Chapel, if anyone wants to find it. And he started doing kind of 3 to 5 minute thoughts about the current crisis, that kind of mini sermons. Did one in Samoan the other day, because that's his culture. And that's just slowly growing. So some days he'll just take a picture of the space here. There's a lot of art here, and share that with the community, share a Bible verse. Other times he'll do a short kind of thought for the day. So that's more about pushing stuff out, less, So you've got a mix there, I guess, of examples of online groups. I think Facebook groups work really well for things like mums and toddlers and 20s and 30s groups, those kind of thing. Because that's where people already are. You need to think differently about different groups, about using the spaces that they are. And then the other thing I want to encourage more ministers to give people a feeling. So not necessarily that here's a sentence you can tweet because this will be the best thing you can tweet all week, but actually encouraging people to, tweet in church or tweet alongside the service while it's on Zoom, because you may be the only Jesus that some people ever see, because they're not even thinking about coming into church. So the more you can empower your congregation to feel confident in their discipleship, in their relationship with Jesus, the more that I think they're going to feel comfortable to share that and have enough wisdom and authenticity to share online. The things that seem to get shared most online are vulnerable things and funny things. I'm not particularly humorous, not intentionally anyway, I don't think, a lot of the time, but I do enjoy sharing
memes about the coronavirus.
Yes. So there's been quite a busy group called Baby Pandemic and Memes, which I suspect quite a lot of people are in there. So it's kind of thinking about how you are kind of sharing in there. And I did a paper a couple of years ago, and one of my Facebook friends gave me a quote that I used that said, online as anything else, I am me, and it's become abundantly clear over the years that I can't hide that online any more than I can in real life. I don't pretend to be anything other than I am, warts and all, and I've seen that God uses it all for good. So I think a lot of the job of the minister is to encourage people to feel confident in their discipleship, so that when they go and have the everyday life conversations with other people, online and offline, you feel a bit more confident talking about it. Someone said to me about my cancer post, if I wasn't quite such a staunch atheist, I might think there was something in it all. I was amazed he even said that. So there's no magic bullet in any of this, and I think it's about being open to experimentation, not worrying about things going wrong, and giving people a bit more space. I keep talking about devolved responsibility, don't I? So involve the church. So social media should not necessarily be another pressure on ministers who are already trying to do a million other things. It's a space where you can encourage people to look out for themselves. One of the things I've done with students is set up a Facebook group to go with a particular degree course. And all those stupid questions that drive you insane because they're in the handbook, like what date is, the assignment due? Someone posts that on Facebook. Before I've gone on there, one of their colleagues has said it's on whatever date. So you can regain some time from that as well.
Yeah, I really like what you're saying about if we encourage people's daily discipleship, so to speak, then it's about them being Christian in their lives rather than the church having to orchestrate it all somehow, which is kind of what we should be doing anyway. Yeah. Duncan, have you got a final, question, reflection, something here? And then I'm going to give Bex a final word.
I think it's fair to say that there's quite a wide range of people who have been logging in today. Some of them aren't Facebook users and they're watching for the first time on a Facebook page. So that's been a learning experience for them. And for us, we discovered that if the host pops out of Zoom to go and fix an image up to show, then we lose the feed in this particular version. So there's something to learn for all of us. And the other thing to note is that there's been quite a range of people from different contexts. Some of them with ministry responsibilities, and others who are members of congregations, and who are all of them together trying to work out what does discipleship look like for us at the moment. And there's a huge amount of wisdom and shared experience that's been pouring through our Facebook feeds, and I'm sure will continue to come through the day as well as people come in later on. So thanks very much for everybody who's been chatting and participating and interacting with one another. It's great.
That's what I like to hear, is that people are interacting with each other. It's not just me. I mean, obviously, I've had to concentrate on talking to the screen, so I've not seen a single thing that's come through, but I can go and have a look afterwards, which is one of the nice things about, contemporary. If you miss it the first time, there's usually a second chance.
That's right.
So, yeah. So,
Okay.
So, Bex, have you got a final word? There are too many possible words.
there's lots, but I gave a talk at Spring Harvest last year, and I was asked to speak about the book of James. That's what everyone was concentrating on, and I quite liked some of the verses that came through. So James 1 was everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. I think that's a really good mantra to take online. Galatians, the fruits of the Spirit, I quite often get people to think about what does that look like? What does patience look like online? What does joy look? Does joy mean we have to be going, hey, life is perfect all the time? Or actually, is there a better way to show the realities of that? But some other things about James is faith versus actions. So, if we tell people we're going to pray for them, which is, you see a classic of that online, don't you? Go and do that, but also consider if you can do something to help the situation. And the other bit from James 4 is, brothers and sisters, do not slander one another. I think Christians are really good at looking for the differences rather than the similarities. So I think if we can look for the similarities, what we can learn from each other. And sort of my attitude when I look at stuff is, that's quite different from what I'm thinking. I think that's quite interesting. Why do you think that? We can have more that kind of question. I think that can be really powerful. And that's a good witness for online as well. Because otherwise people just seeing us having a go at each other over things that they see as totally irrelevant. So I've got a real passion for being relevant, but without losing everything in the name of being relevant. There's something we stand for, but we want to find a way to connect with contemporary culture, and the space that's there and the opportunities we've got. The discussion about digital focuses on what we can't do and what it stops us doing so often. So start thinking about what it lets you do, and don't worry if it goes a bit wrong. Most of the time you've got another chance.
Very good. And have you got a copy of one of your books there to show us?
Again?
There we go.
Yeah, Raising Children in the Digital Age, 2nd edition. I'm supposed to have ready to the publishers by the end of July. Not quite sure when it's actually coming out.
Sometime next year, yeah. Bex, thank you so much. This has been such a weird time for you and difficult time for you, and to be able to slot this in a couple of days before you fly out, we are really, really grateful, and grateful both for your breadth of experience, but also your authenticity about that. And I think everything from have a go to all the other stuff, my brain's gone to fog down as well. And I mean, for us, we want to have ongoing conversations around this stuff. So this for us is a kind of a first experiment. We've just been asked where can people find Bex online? It's Dr. Bex something. Dr. Bex.
Yeah, I think if you just put Bex Lewis in, I come up a lot, but Dr. Bex L is the username I use for most places. So like Twitter, Instagram, all those kind of places. Normally, if there's a platform for it, I've at least experimented with it. Not very good on Snapchat, but... And
I'll do a follow-up post on our Presbytery page too to give people some links and contacts as well.
Yep.
So, look, we hope and pray that the journey back is a good one for you, and that it's not too either stressful or exhausting and all that kind of stuff. And we're very conscious that when you get back to the other end, that's... life in Britain is weird at the moment, and so we definitely think of you and your well-being with that as well. And I would ask people who've been online today to offer some prayers over the next few days for you with that.
Yeah, I'm flying Saturday through till Sunday, so I think I'll our journey, but I'm sure there's plenty of people that have been to the UK from this end of the world before, so pretty done.
And I don't know. We will see you sometime. I don't know when it's going to be.
Well, maybe we'll do another one of these, and I'll just have
and that'd be good. And you'd have to get up at 6 a.m. again, like you did the first time. That was ugly. I mean, well, not ugly. It was what I mean.
I'm not a morning person, but
Neither am I. Okay, thank you so much. Thanks everybody for watching in.
yes.
And we'll look forward to reading back the feed and the comments.
Yes.
Okay. See you later
Have a
on.
well, Bex. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.